All of the fun starts this fall on the WB with Muffy the Mummy Trapper.
Ugh, Dad, can we please stop scanning this planet's frequencies? Their music sucks.
Yeah, it kinda does. Sorry, I just like to get immersed in their culture.
I guess that one song by, who was it, Unknown Henson was pretty good.
Oh yeah, that song was pretty awesome.
What even is this planet again?
Globotron. But you wanna hear something weird? Those creatures down there call it Earth.
Earth. What a dumb name. Earth.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that.
Have you ever seen any of the creatures down there?
Yeah, a bunch actually. I mean, one time we were out scanning vegetation and we almost killed one of them.
Really? Oh man, Dad almost got in trouble. That's against the rules.
It was fine though. We put him back together. He temporarily got control of the ship, but, we patched him up and, damage control was, I wanna say minimal, but like 6 more of them saw the whole thing go down. I mean, it was a cleanup job. But I think we're kinda past that at this point.
Wow, you really messed your patrol up. I'm surprised you didn't get fired.
You and me both.
So what are we doing today?
Just scanning, observing, cataloging temperatures, the usual.
Maybe one day when I grow up, I'll be able to mess with their weapon systems.
I bet you could. You can do anything you want, if you work your ass off. Unlike your old dad here, who's stuck on observation.
So, what are we looking at exactly?
Well, you see that land blob down there?
Yeah.
It's kind of that middle piece, below the big part and above that little skinny part.
Uh-huh.
We just gotta do a flyover. See what some weather patterns are doing over that bumpy part over there. The little guys call it North Carolina.
God, these names are so dumb.
Yeah, I thought you'd get a kick out of that one.
The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, Caleb Hanks, and I am here, as always, with the great, the grand, the wonderful Mr. Austin Burgess. Austin, how are you tonight, brother man?
I'm doing pretty well tonight, man. It's been a busy week at work, but I'm excited to get in here with you tonight.
You are telling me the busyness is a plague, and I have been plagued myself. But you and I were traipsing around the frothy shores of Tortuga last week on our Blackbeard the Pirate episode.
Right? I've got that vacation hangover going this week.
Oh, I do too. I hate the feeling of having to come back to reality. And it was really funny. We got on this whole spiel about how, well, spoiler alert for the last episode, about there might be this crazy tie-in with these weird blue ghostly lights that people see underneath the water on the island of Ocracoke off the coast of North Carolina, and people attribute that to potentially being the ghost of Blackbeard the Pirate. But we were kind of throwing out some ideas like, hey, there's another weird phenomenon that goes on this part of the state, and we kind of started throwing around the idea that maybe some of this phenomenon could actually be tied to UFO phenomenon. And by the end of the episode, you and I were just sitting there racking our brains, trying our damnedest to just think like, who could we ever talk to about UFOs to understand the stuff a little bit more?
Right? I mean, the topic's just been on my mind since last week, just the potential crossover between some of this ghostly phenomenon, just weird paranormal phenomena, and UFOs in general. I mean, it's definitely piqued my interest and been wanting to get more into it, specifically back in the mountains here. So really been trying to rack my brain as well on who would be our, maybe local expert here in the mountains on the subject of UFOs.
And it finally, in a flash of light, it came to me, and I knew exactly who we were going to bring in on this episode. You know him, you love him. He's an Asheville, North Carolina native. Dr. Stephen Greer, everybody. Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Well,
hi, guys. How's it going? It's good to be here with you. I'm just a little country doctor from Charlotte, North Carolina.
I meant to say he's a North Carolina native, but I messed it up by saying Asheville native.
I think he lived in Asheville for a while.
I did, and I spent a lot of time up in Arlington, Virginia now, obviously.
But we're kidding. No, we've got...
Oh, wait. Who am I?
Oh, yeah. Well... Okay, everybody, put your hands together. Don't clap. Just put your hands together in prayer because Jesus, he needs it. Ladies and gentlemen, the great, the wonderful, the best in the business, my guitar player and hitchhiker, I'm his drummer, the great Micah Hanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Micah. I go by many names. I'm a man of many beverages. Tonight, my code name will be Gomez. Tonight, our safe word will be Igor.
All right. Usually mine is hippopotamus, but we will do yours.
Updating my notes.
Yeah,
go ahead. To go.
Get that one into the mix. But guys, it's great to be here finally, joining you all to talk about hodags on ghosts in the mountains. Yeah, I've wanted to do this for a long time.
Yeah.
We decided that, the UFO topic was going to be way too on the nose for Micah, so nothing but hodags tonight. You can call this podcast Hodags Are Us.
I may have dated a hodag once.
Hey, man, I think we've all been down that road.
It was really dark. I was in the woods,
I was in the woods. I was just like feeling around.
How every great relationship starts.
Look, if your relationship does not start out in the woods feeling around, then, well, you're doing it wrong. But we are lying to you. That's all we do on this show. We just lie. We're a bunch of liars. We're a bunch of phonies, frauds, hucksters, and fibbers. But we actually are going to try to give you a little bit of substance because, me and the burglar, our whole shtick is North Carolina is a big, weird place, and it just gets weirder. The weird gets weirder, and the weirder is even weirder than you think it is.
Right. We've spent a lot of time talking about how Asheville and Western North Carolina is just kind of a hotbed for the weird. But, when you think about that, UFOs should tie into that broad subject of the weird, right?
If it's not a frickin' nest of furry Sasquatch in Madison County, or ghosts and haints and haunts throughout every frickin' inn from here to Timbuktu, that's I think on the coast as well. It just so happens to be that there's a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean probably about as much as the Bigfoot activity in Madison County, maybe more UFO activity in the state of North Carolina. And as we have found out after the fact of starting the show that we actually are kind of a history podcast, we're going to get a little bit into that. And the bro here, he is going to lead us down the road on quite a few really crazy encounters that he heard firsthand. We're going to get into all of that. And Micah and I are going to share a couple of strange stories that kind of pertain to our own, what I will just say, anomalous sightings.
But before we get into that, since we are, a Ghosts in the Mountains podcast, I think, we should probably give a little bit of a UFO overview, brief history to listeners. And who better than to deliver that than Micah Hanks?
Yeah. Interestingly, I could say that some of the very earliest aerial phenomena that's really been reported in the United States and that kind of captivated the minds of people in various parts of the world, you might say actually began right here in Western North Carolina, because you go all the way back to the early part of the last century with the Brown Mountain Lights. Now, your listeners are familiar with the Brown Mountain Lights. When I was a kid growing up, we were always interested in ghost stories. And some of the books that I would read would be Nancy Roberts and her husband, Bruce Roberts, who also was an excellent photographer. She actually went down to Brown Mountain and she wrote a couple of entries in some of her books about the Brown Mountain phenomenon. And this is a little known fact. Bruce got a really good picture of the Brown Mountain Lights that I still have. I've got that book.
Okay.
And in that picture, you see Brown Mountain Ridge and these little lights, and a couple of them are distinctively above the ridge line. And the interesting thing about that is, of course, most people, in fact, back in the 1920s, I believe, when George R. Mansfield did the first official scientific investigation into the Brown Mountain Lights, he was with the U.S. Geological Service. He had said that from Ginger Cake Mountain, you could look down into the valleys and you could see the oncoming lights of railroad lights, and he presumed that's what these things were. But even Mansfield pointed out, if you go far enough back, there were old-timers who back in the days of and even prior to the Civil War, people who were really old at the time he spoke to them, but who actually were still alive, they remembered seeing those lights all the way back when. And he said that's significant because this predated when there were railroads in the region. Now, the other thing, too, is there are some really good photos, and you guys have had Dr. Dan Caton on the program here, and he was running webcams for years that did manage to capture luminous phenomena, whatever that is, over Brown Mountain. So the point is, the very first reports that are known, and there are all the stories about, indigenous American traditions that document, lights and things in the sky. I've actually found a few, but none of those indigenous legends can really be equated to the Brown Mountain lights.
For sure. We touched on that on our episode.
I'm a listener, right?
I know. Right. Yeah. You know this.
Can I just say
I've
real
been
quick?
debriefed.
I do find it a little strange that George R.R. Mansfield, the author of The Song of Fire and Ice, which speaks clearly, in my opinion, about when the worm mander with its flaming tail meets the wintry cold of the Brown Mountain area.
Well, I mean, again, some might think it's a stretch to tie Brown Mountain in with UFOs, but it's important to point out that, again, although the Brown Mountain reports began in the early 19-teens, and according to some, they might have also been influenced by or even were influential on Jules Verne, and specifically his second, there was the first book, Rober the Conqueror, but then Master of the World.
Correct.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit in our chronicling.
Yeah,
We did
Our 5 hours of the Brown Mountain Lights.
He refers to the Great Erie, but again, that seems to be Table Rock, or actually it may be a portion of Table Rock. Anyway, point is, the idea of lights in the sky and a mysterious mountain, that really, you might say, isn't the beginning of American ufology. There are other instances where that kind of trope arises, but it's certainly one of the earliest known newspaper accounts that got widespread attention. Now,
For sure.
Later on, in the 1960s, once UFOs have reached critical mass and all the adventure magazines and things are publishing about this, a whole new wave of people who lived in the Linville area, like Ralph Lale, they started saying, oh yeah, these things are UFOs. They are from the planet PWAM. I've been up there on the mountain. I've spoken to these people. They all happen to look like beautiful women, which, I guess he loved. And he even claimed to have this little, what some have called an alien mummy in his shop.
Damn it. I don't have the soundbite loaded.
You'll have to put that in post.
And I know you guys have talked about this, but I figured out what the mummy is.
Yeah, we actually gave you credit on our episode for the Homer tape, right?
Right, yep, that's right.
That's
Absolutely
correct.
Right. So anyway.
Credit acquired, or
Indeed.
attributed.
So long story short, again, Western North Carolina has a deep history of this, and yes, the Brown Mountain Lights are one of the earliest instances of aerial phenomena, but later on, that was very much immersed into the whole UFO, or I should say subsumed into the UFO culture.
And that kind of take on it is what attracted people like Alan Greenfield and Tim Beckley and these early ufologists to the area to study that from that perspective almost.
Yeah.
But even going back farther, if you look at like maybe the current Chimney Rock, the angelic procession or whatever we wanted to call that, that still gives kind of an early pre-craft.
Yeah, and
account.
Later, I'll say also, John Keel picked up on that, and John Keel wrote about that in his various books. He mentioned Chimney
Austin's
Rock.
a big fan.
Yeah,
I love Keel. Yeah.
I do too. I've read all. Keel was an interesting guy. We could do a whole show just about Keel, but all that legend.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of unique ties to this region. Now, some of that extends beyond North Carolina's borders, but John Keel was well aware of a lot of that, and often wrote about UFO happenings that occurred right here in the North Carolina area.
For sure. And not to mention, I think that also kind of leads us into where we're wanting to go with this history of the whole thing. Now, Brown Mountain was such a strange phenomenon that it legitimately garnered attention from the U.S. military. And I think that's a pretty good dovetail into a very, very massive part of UFO history, which is, at least for the time, the biggest investigation into the phenomenon, which was known famously as Project Blue Book. And Austin, you got some info on them you're going to toss at us, right?
Yeah. So, there's a few other kind of, I'd say projects that predated Blue Book that were also headed up by the U.S. Air Force.
You want to get into those?
Well, we don't have to go into the detail, but, it started off as Project Sign, correct?
Yeah, Project Sign. Really, we should just say Kenneth Arnold saw flying saucers in 1947 over Mount Rainier. And again, this was the kind of shot heard around the world. This is partially what, by the end of maybe 1947, interestingly, some say as early as 1946. I kind of doubt that. But there are some historians who have tried to say that there were maybe some inquiries that preceded. Now, that's
Like
certainly
the Trinity case, maybe?
no, not that one.
Okay.
But I will say this: there were ghost rocket sightings in Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
And the United States did have an interest in that, but not because they thought aliens. They probably thought, maybe Russia was operating something. Long story short, Project Sign is instituted, and it actually produced what was known as this estimate of the situation, where they said, look, we don't know what these things are. Our conclusion is that some of these phenomena they're obviously piloted. They're obviously, vehicles. We don't have anything like this. We don't think Russia could possibly have anything like this, or that the German scientists could have produced something like this and Russia acquired it. Our conclusion is these must be extraterrestrial. They actually said that. Now, problem is, the sign estimate was destroyed because top brass in Washington were like, no, that's not good. We're not satisfied with that explanation. Go home, try again. And they ordered all copies of that document destroyed. The successor program, Project Grudge, as the name would entail, was much more, they played this all down. They were very much of the debunking kind of mindset. But as continuous sightings of UFOs in the United States, continued to garner attention, and of course the military had to try and deal with this issue, the next iteration, Project Blue Book, which officially began in 1953, I believe, under Edward Ruppelt, that became, as Caleb said, the longest systematic study of UFOs and aerial phenomena by any government organization.
Yeah, went all the way through 1969, correct?
Technically, it actually ended in early 1970.
Okay, wow, yeah. So,
But long story short, 1969, the reason that the Air Force decided they would close the project that year, and it did officially close the following, very, very top of January in 70, is because of the so-called, Colorado UFO Project, the Condon Committee, led by Edward U. Condon. Weird name, I know, but anyway, yeah.
Austin, the Western North Carolina cheater, doesn't know anything about that, does he? Moving to Colorado.
So, well, technically I moved here from Colorado. So,
oh, well, what the hell are we even? We can't even do this show anymore.
Flip that table.
So 1947 really kind of launched what we would consider the modern era of UFOs, I would say, because didn't the infamous Roswell incident happen, a week after Kenneth Arnold's sightings?
Yeah, it did.
How convenient.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into details on that because I know how you feel on that subject. But we have to at least admit that is a big part of UFO lore in general, and probably what a lot of people's introduction to the subject is.
Certainly. In fact, last week on Capitol Hill, I was seeing former government employees sitting there talking about bodies that were retrieved from the Roswell crash, which actually involved the Corona crash in 1947. And, naturally, we won't get into it, like you said, but if you ask me, there's a whole different story to Roswell, and it ain't aliens, okay?
Yeah.
But to that point, there are many people who still lead with that, what I would call the sort of mythology that's been built around that.
Yeah, for sure. People that are interested in this on a surface level, I think that's, first thing that comes to mind when they think of UFOs, UFO hotspots, something like that. That's probably
And for all the fine folks out there who appreciate this podcast, and you hear me, talking about Roswell as though I don't think it's aliens, if you think I think it's Mogul, think again. No, there's a whole deeper story, and it's a weird one. We'll save that for episode 943.
I'm going to make a note of it.
Go ahead and log that on your calendar, Caleb.
So jumping back specifically to Project Blue Book, I think the mission and focus of this was really to kind of dispel some of this widespread hysteria that had come about with the UFO subject. I think they were trying to kind of create rational scientific explanations that kind of, calmed down some of the people that were freaking out about some of the sightings that were kind of running rampant and the flaps that were happening at the time. With that being said, they did investigate, various reports of UFO sightings across Western North Carolina, with cases in Highlands, Brown Mountain, like we mentioned, Waynesville, Hickory, Boone, and even here in Asheville. And I think the Asheville case is probably one of the most interesting to me. And that occurred during, it was over a span of a week in May of 1964. And what was then known as the Asheville School for Boys. It's a private boarding school that's known today simply as Asheville School. I think it's off Patton Avenue. You could see the big water tower there off of exit 44 if you're driving down that way. So this report in Project Blue Book detailed various sightings of unexplained lights and objects in the sky that were being reported by multiple students that happened on consecutive days of the week. And it all kind of culminated in this big sighting that multiple students reported where they witnessed a saucer-shaped craft near the campus water tower. Some say that it even scraped the water tower, producing sparks. School officials also reported that most of the students claimed to have felt compelled or called to look out the window when they witnessed the craft, and what they described as almost a sixth sense or mental telepathy connection. And one student tried to communicate with the saucer with his mind, which is something that's probably more common than you might actually realize. So I think that's a pretty interesting occurrence just because there's multiple witnesses on that. It's happening over multiple days. And even the school officials are starting to become concerned. So they call in Project Blue Book, U.S. government, to figure out what's going on. And this is one of the cases within Project Blue Book's files that was left unresolved.
Yeah. Interestingly, there are a lot of reports in the Project Blue Book files that were actually logged as being resolved that probably weren't. You know, there's a researcher named Brad Sparks who's done incredible work. And he went back through and he reevaluated cases. Quick example of one that they claimed had been solved under the tenure of Project Blue Book director, one of the later directors, Hector Quintanilla, the famous Minot Air Force Base case. And we won't get into it. It's really not a North Carolina story. But the point is, I mean, it was a multiple witness military encounter, including a B-52 Stratofortress that flies over the parked UAP that is down on the ground. It's basically, you know, kind of tic-tac shaped, but it's got this front bumper that they could see, and it's emitting light. And they fly over the thing and watch it while it's parked on the ground. I mean, an incredible descriptive sighting. Project Blue Book said it was probably ball lightning that was detected on radar. Keep in mind, their radar scopes got photographs of the dadgum thing out there. And they said it was probably ball lightning, and there were radar traces and people looking to the planet Jupiter, and they marked it as resolved. So my point is, I mean, some of history's arguably best cases from the Blue Book era, they were erroneously marked resolved. For this one to have actually made it through that process, and they said we couldn't explain what was seen, that might mean something.
Can I just put a call to action out there? As a galactic civilization, can we aesthetically on our vehicles move away from the spoilers? God.
Uh-oh. Did we spoil?
No, those things, the ass fins on the backs of cars.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was like a front bumper, but
Yeah.
I was wondering where this goes.
yeah. Sorry.
So yeah,
Igor.
like I said, there was various cases that Blue Book investigated across Western North Carolina, but that one really stuck out to me. I think some of the almost psychic mental telepathy elements, you know, well, that's could be up for interpretation, but I think that's also a common theme you kind of see across some of these UFO reports as a psychic connection communication.
Yeah.
there.
Well, the weird thing about this happening at the boys' school in 1964 is it's very similar to the
Rua, Zimbabwe.
Just gonna say, yeah, the one down there in Zimbabwe, and there, you know, there's some different interpretations of what exactly happened down that way. But here again, you have the story that is a group of children that are witnessing something that are essentially saying that they're experiencing some form of telepathic communication with what they are interpreting as some sort of alien being. Yeah. So that's kind of bizarre.
I highly recommend, by the way, Randall Nickerson did an excellent film called The Aerial School Phenomena.
Yeah.
We actually did a showing of that in Washington, D.C. And I went up there and I was kind of a moderator for a panel that we did there in Washington. But definitely check out that film if you want a good corollary for the case that Austin has described right there that involves children who claim that they were actually communicating with some kind of, again, I guess the terminology that would be used these days would be non-human intelligence.
Yeah, definitely. The Project Blue Book file actually has drawings that these children kind of hand recreated of the saucer they saw. So we'll drop those in the Patreon folder. But I think it's pretty interesting that there was a lot of commonalities across these reports from multiple children at the school. So that one definitely stuck out to me. But jumping back as we wrap up the Project Blue Book in Western North Carolina section here, not only were they investigating these various cases here, they actually used an office known as the Air Weather Service, which is located in the Federal Building in downtown Asheville, to assist with processing and providing weather data used to investigate and corroborate some of these cases, looking for alternative explanations for some of these reports. Which it's pretty cool that Project Blue Book has some roots and origins in its operation side in Asheville itself.
Yeah.
If you're a paranormal tourist, baby, Asheville, North Carolina's got a little bit of something for everybody here.
Right. I think the Air Weather Service kind of turned into a few different things. I think the 14th Weather Squadron, which still exists in that federal building, is probably what it mostly morphed into, but NOAA is also housed a section in that building. So, you know, that they still have a pretty heavy investment into weather phenomena investigation going out of that building in downtown Asheville.
Well, this is kind of a hotbed for it anymore. We had hail today. We had a horrific hurricane a couple of months back.
Yeah.
In fact,
yeah.
if you notice, the last time I was in studio with you guys, I mean, it was frigid outside. It was record cold temperatures. Tonight I brought a thunderstorm and hail.
Micah, you probably are Thor at this point.
And the god of thunder!
And rock and roll.
Laugh with me, imbeciles.
Yeah, the last time we had Micah on for the Reynolds Mansion episode, it was not only, I think it was literally 3 degrees outside.
frigid.
Yeah.
And the wind was blowing. You could damn near hear it on the mics. It was so loud.
I remember us sprinting to our cars and it being the most frigid 3 to 5 seconds of my life.
I felt so bad for you guys because you guys had to go drive, like wait for the cars to warm up. And I'm like, oh, God.
But, speaking of that, it is pretty interesting. Like Christopher O'Brien, pretty renowned paranormal investigator, UFO researcher who was big in my interest in the subject, pretty influential for that. He actually listed out a bunch of characteristics that he found that these UFO hotspots kind of share, and rare weather phenomena was one of the characteristics listed. So
I'll also mention, unfortunately, we lost Chris O'Brien. He was a very good friend of mine. Chris, actually, the last time we talked, which was a couple of months, I guess, a few months really before he passed away, he was talking about coming to Asheville. He wanted to come down here. He and I to drive up and meet Ray Stanford together. Ray Stanford, who wrote the famous book about the Socorro incident, which is called, I think, Socorro Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry. Odd title, interesting book.
I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah, but yeah, again, Chris O'Brien, legendary researcher, the very first guy to investigate a cattle mutilation on what was at the time known as the Sherman Ranch, now, of course, famously Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll miss you, buddy. He and I, we had a lot of good times together, for sure.
Man.
we've given him a few tributes on the show, but
Thank you.
never had enough. So yeah, for sure. So I thought that was kind of another interesting connection that we kind of drew there. But yeah, I think it's really cool that what is known as the predominant government investigation program on UFOs really had some roots in Western North Carolina. But even outside of that, independent investigators, someone named George Fawcett, who was I think he was native to Mount Airy, North Carolina. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, yes. In fact, yeah, I had a couple of books by him,
Yeah.
and I loaned them to another researcher. That individual took those books and kept them, but yeah, I actually had a couple of those.
I've got one of it's the Quarter Century Studies of UFOs in North Carolina.
Yeah. He did a newsletter called Fawcett's Files, I think.
Cool.
No. I'm thinking about George Fowler. That was the Fowler's Files, but he was based here, I believe, too.
Okay. So either way, it's pretty interesting that some of these predominant ufologists that were developing these zines, publishing them, these little books that would almost be almost like the newsletters, the blogs of the time on the subject.
They were very much the case. I mean,
That's what Alan Greenfield was doing back in his day.
Exactly.
Everybody did it. I mean, back in the day, Jim Mosley and, of course, Tim Beckley, who was also a colleague of Greenfield, and Gene Steinberg and the guys, all these people. Gray Barker up in West Virginia, of course. They and actually John Keel himself, they were all producing what at the time in print media was the thing, which was like, zines, newsletters, these little smaller publications, which have been replaced in the digital era by blogs and things along those lines.
For sure.
Austin,
Social media.
I just figured out the move, man. Well, I guess I'm spoiling it for both of them now, but we ambushed Micah and Dr. Greenfield with being on a podcast with us together, and that way they can finally get together and talk.
Oh, Alan and I've been in communication, yeah, and he loved the episode that he was on.
Oh man, he was so fantastic.
Yeah. That was the first time us actually, talking to him in that capacity, and it felt like there was an instant rapport and connection with that guy.
Alan's wonderful, yeah. He and again, he was part of the old guard, and there was kind of this this kind of esoteric rat pack of UFO researchers back in the day. Again, Alan Greenfield, Tim Beckley, Jim Mosley, and seems like there should have been a fourth one in there
Gray
too.
Barker, maybe?
Gray was definitely kind of part of that.
He was the older figure probably for them.
Maybe so, yeah. He might have been a little older. I mean, he was a contemporary of John Keel, but there again, I get ahead of myself.
Yeah. So either way, jumping back to George Fawcett in particular, in that book I mentioned, the Quarter Century Studies of UFOs in North Carolina, there was actually a report coming from Western North Carolina in Mount Mitchell that happened in June of 1966, where 4 people camping at the park reported seeing a UFO with 3 red lights land in the cover of darkness. And what they reported was about 600 feet from their campsite.
Why is that significant?
The 600 feet?
No, I mean,
3
just-
red lights.
Yeah.
3 red lights. That I think that's probably significant because I think that's something that I don't want to get ahead of myself, but
ahead.
we're going to touch on with what's commonly reported with triangle craft.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a trend. A little tiny bit.
TR3B, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, we
That
can talk
was
about
a
that
damn
too.
TR3B.
Yeah.
So,
But it is interesting how often that shows up. Just listeners, keep your eyes and ears peeled. You'll start to notice a trend here.
it definitely is, but I guess the one fact that kind of threw me off the triangle craft trail on this one was they reported that it landed, in the park all night, but upon dawn, they saw it take off again, and they looked through binoculars and reported that it was red in color and bell-shaped, which is another kind of commonly reported shape, but that was more common back in the 60s era, before the triangle crafts kind of took more predominance, I would say. Is that correct?
Yeah, maybe you would say that. The bell shape, the intriguing thing I would like to know is, was it actually shaped like a bell and flying with the open portion downward? Or was it superficially looking against the sky in 2 dimensions, shaped like a bell? Because that kind of a shape almost is reminiscent of some of our modern stealth aircraft.
Fair enough. I don't have that description from the book, but definitely would be something to
In which-
further look into.
well,
Yeah, when you think about the stealth bomber, it's got kind of that weird little kind of short tail
Yep.
on it. So if you're just seeing the silhouette of that, I can see how that would potentially be bell shaped.
there are some stealth aircraft that you could say, effectively have a bell shape. And in
Yeah.
fact, again, if you were actually looking at them from below up at the bottom of the craft, the lighting configuration would effectively be a triangle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing too that I think about is kind of like if you're thinking about the traditional saucer shaped, more plump midsection to it, and that maybe seeming a bit more like a bell, like kind of a deeper saucer.
Yeah.
Because I have seen, and I don't know the validity of them obviously, but I have seen some like older photographs here and there that are some kind of older, metallic disc kind of shapes, but some of them do seem to have like almost like I guess if it were long ways, a taller hull, I suppose. So
Yeah.
it's always kind of weird to try to interpret what angle they're seeing the damn thing
Exactly.
from,
And you're going off a description. Going back to the Kenneth Arnold reporting, he said, what was the quote, that they were skipping like saucers across the sky, and that what got used to turn into the phrase flying saucers.
Yeah, and rather suspiciously, everybody who started seeing weird things in the sky thereafter started describing discs and saucers, which
Yeah,
in fact,
exactly.
you go back and you look at the history of ufology, everybody talks about the so-called Tic Tac nowadays, and they say this new kind of UAP has shown up. There are reports of essentially egg or Tic Tac shaped objects that go back to the 1940s.
Cigars.
Yeah, cigar
They
shape,
always
yeah.
talk about
Yep.
cigars.
That's another one, yeah. These elongated ellipsoid shapes. That's nothing new. And the fact that there was one captured by an APFLIR targeting pod that was hooked up to an FA-18 Super Hornet in 2004, that's nothing new, I promise you. It's just that we had better technology and we were able to finally actually track one of those things.
Yeah. All right.
Interesting.
So was that it for the Mount Mitchell sighting there?
I think so. Yeah.
That is so creepy to me because I cannot tell you how many times I have driven up to Mount Mitchell in the middle of the night and just gone up there to the parking lot because when I was single, I used to be an avid meteor shower watcher.
And UFO abductee.
And every once in a while, the red lights would come and then I'd wake up naked in the woods. But
Thinking he'd spent the night with a hodag.
well, maybe I did. Who knows?
But that is cool because, I've heard reports that kind of allege some, what I would consider a conspiracy theory about some underground military facilities tied to Mount Mitchell, but I'd never found anything that substantiated any actual reports from there, except this one sighting that's listed in this essentially zine from 1966.
Now, I've never heard that about Mount Mitchell, but Brown Mountain is a different story. The Linville Gorge has long been associated with military operations, claims of an underground base, and yet again, Commander X, that notorious figure from back in the day, he published this whole book, which you can now actually buy in digital format, and I think reprints are available because the late Tim Beckley with Global Communications, he reprinted that book about underground alien bases. And again, really the crux of it, this had all been popularized during the time of the Dulce, New Mexico phenomenon, and the alleged base there, but again, the idea that there had been some sort of a facility under the Archuleta Mesa. But they tied that all in with Brown Mountain too, and the fact that lights had been seen there for a long time. So yet again, coming full circle, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when these ideas about alien underground bases and secret facilities started really kind of taking a hold in the UFO subculture, Brown Mountain resurfaces. So Western North Carolina, yet again, the alleged location of an underground alien facility. And in fact, a long time ago, not that long, I guess 2012 or so, there was an intrepid group of kids who came down here, Scooby-Doo types, and I took them up there to Brown Mountain, and I took them down into this cave. And I showed him this big weird rock, and I said, this almost is reminiscent of like the entrance to a tunnel or something like that. But anyway.
That might be documented on a popular show, maybe, right?
Yeah, there was probably a show done about it, yeah.
But the thing about it is the one thing that was not uncovered about what you guys went and looked at was the truth. And the truth is what we all know it to be true in our hearts.
Absolutely.
Wormmander is the cause of the Brown Mountain Lights.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering what I'm talking about with the Wormmander, if you have not listened to our Brown Mountain episode, it was told through the hills in the times of old, in the ancient hills. And by that I mean Morganton, that there was a strange little creature with a flame on its butt that lived deep in the caverns below Brown Mountain. And just recently, we have put together a t-shirt, and all I can say is, behold the Wormmander, for he is real. And if you want to bring a Wormmander home, you can. I'm so sorry to cut into the serious talk, but it's a funny shirt. You'd like it.
I've had some adventures with Wormmanders. I was up there one time actually playing Pokemon Go, and I thought I'd actually found a Pokemon. It turned out it was a damned Wormmander.
There you go.
Yeah, and it followed me home.
That's going to be our
You still
next...
have it?
I can confirm nor deny. I cannot confirm.
Micah's last house did burn down.
I can't say. Yeah. That's privileged, classified information. Yeah.
All right,
So yeah, I actually saw the thing about Mount Mitchell having the alleged underground facility in a book, which was, I think it was called Underground Military Bases in Western North Carolina Mountains by, I think it's by someone named Mary Joyce, who I'm not going to condone some of the ideas in that book, but it does cover some of these alleged rumors around underground facilities. I think the main component of that revolves around Perry, which is the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institution up in Rosman, North Carolina. But before it was actually known as this educational institute or observatory that is today, it's actually used as a former NASA, DOD, and NSA tracking facility.
True.
So it does have some actual legit military ties to it. But, being a small town situation like that, I basically grew up right down the road from it. So you hear these local rumors that swirl around about underground tunnel systems that connect to the facility. And those have kind of circulated for years. Some people kind of think of it as the Area 51 of Western North Carolina, but I think these are all kind of local legends at this point.
I can certainly tell you I have communicated with the people at Perry before, and as fun as some of those legends are, really, I mean, that facility, it actually did play a role during the Cold War in, I guess, collection of sensitive information for the United States government. But these days, it's no longer performing in that function. It is a dark sky facility, I think. You can go out there and they actually invite people to bring telescopes, and you can do astronomy out there, yeah.
I think they do camp, like you could book a cabin and stay out there for a weekend to do a sky watch or something.
And if indeed at some point, I was talking with one of the directors out there, and they were going to have me come out and do a piece about that for the debrief. Maybe if I do that, you gentlemen can join me.
Would love
that
to.
would be awesome.
Yeah, we've actually talked about that, going out to Perry a few times.
And heck, if we can make it out there, there's another place that maybe we can hit up. Not that it would make a lot of sense for us to be there, but Lumberton, North Carolina. God, the name of it just gives me chills already.
I think it's a little further east than what you're talking about, but I mean, same general principle. And I can't imagine why you'd bring up Lumberton in the context of this conversation about UFOs.
Why would I bring up Lumberton?
Well, I think that's actually a topic I'm going to punt to Micah on.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. Many years ago, Caleb and I, we were out in Tempe, Arizona, and for the first time we met a gentleman who at that time was working for the Huffington Post, and that was Lee Spiegel.
Yep.
Lee Spiegel. He remained a dear friend for many years, and Lee would call me up. Lee is the kind of guy, I mean, he had a job. I mean, at the time when nobody was really seriously reporting on UFOs, Lee Spiegel was doing that way back in the day when he worked for WNBC.
How old was he when he was there?
Must have been in his 20s, but
Yeah.
he recorded an album of, because that's how you did this stuff back in the day. He actually recorded a vinyl record about like UFOs and the UFO reality, but he went a step further than that. He actually organized a session before the United Nations, the only one that ever happened in the United States. Lee Spiegel organized this, and, Dr. Jacques Vallée was there.
Yeah.
Of course, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was there. Stanton Friedman, I believe, was there as well. But they put together this entire event at the United Nations. Well, anyway, Lee Spiegel and I were talking one day, and sadly, he passed away just a couple of years ago. He was, again, somebody whose contributions were immeasurable, I'll say. And one thing I will say briefly before we get into the UFOs that he saw, because he actually saw one back in 1975, and this is a famous case and one that really kind of sets the tone for the more modern North Carolina UFO, enigma. But he actually played this audio for me one night. He and I and Race Hobbs on Christmas Eve were on a Skype call. And he says, listen to this. And he plays audio from the Howard Stern show. And there's Howard sitting there. He says, back in the day, we used to work in the studio, and there was this guy down the hall, right? And Lee Spiegel. Lee did this show about UFOs. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, he's a crackpot. We go down there and talk to him. Hey, Lee, you ever seen a UFO? I've never seen one, but I know someone who has. Hey, Lee, you ever seen a Bigfoot before? I've never seen a Sasquatch, but I've talked to several people who have. And,
have you had sex with it? Okay, Howard.
Howard's totally roasting him, and Lee's playing it for us and just cracking up,
That's
and apparently
awesome.
they actually had a pretty good relationship. But Lee did a whole segment Howard Stern did a whole segment on his show.
That's pretty cool.
About Lee Spiegel. Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, cool. That gives you bragging rights, right?
For sure.
So Lee and I were talking one day, and he says, I actually was over there in North Carolina back in 1975 as a reporter, and he said, I was down there, and we saw the Lumberton UFO. And I said, the Lumberton UFO? Now, I didn't know about this at that time, but he had been down there covering this story. I don't recall who it had been, the outlet that he'd been writing for. But in any case, what happened in between April 3rd and maybe the April 5th or 7th in 1975 around Lumberton, North Carolina, is there were multiple sightings over several nights of a triangular craft. He came to North Carolina because it had been several nights that these sightings were occurring, and lo and behold, they were out one night in a parking lot, and Lee says the dadgum thing flew directly over him and hovered. And he said it was a large, roughly the size of a very large SUV, triangular shaped, and it's got, lights at the three corners, and this thing kind of hovers over them, and then it just takes off. Now, we might say these days there are several different kinds of novel drone technologies. I run a UAP database called the UAP Sightings Reporting System, and from time to time I get some interesting photographs sent to the reporting system of triangular UAP. But in 1975, I'm thinking, first of all, do we have anything that could just hover like that? And if we did, that has been kept so off the books and, tucked away in the deep, dark, black world that, that has still not come to light. That has completely managed to skirt any kind of congressional or, as far as I know, executive oversight. So the point being, if that was ours, that's been one of America's deep, dark secrets. And if it was somebody else's, whatever that was, we don't know. But Lee was right there reporting on the scene when he said the dadgum thing comes flying over and he saw it.
I think the big key part of that, though, is the silence. These things are just completely silent, because I don't know when the first jets, and you probably would, but the first jets that were able to actually just vertically take off and kind of hover there for
like
a bit.
Like the Harrier, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You'll have those on naval carriers and things like that. I'm assuming the F-16 and the subsequent models around that, but I don't think in 1975 we had stuff like that could be silent. And as far as I know, today we don't have anything like that that's silent.
Sure, there's stealth aircraft, but then there's completely undetectable at the same time.
Yeah. Again, most stealth aircraft, though, they do not have these performance characteristics that include actually flying without producing sound. One of the issues with a lot of the faster aircraft is the fact that they literally do produce audible sonic booms.
Yep.
And the stealth component usually has to do with a special coating on the exterior that makes them invisible, mostly to radar.
The radar, yeah.
And they're also able to fly at very high altitudes, which can eliminate sound, at least for ground-based observers, but there is still sound produced by those objects. So when you have something that's flying at relatively low altitude, it has a very unconventional shape. It's producing no noise, and it hovers in 1975. That completely defies simple explanation in terms of any kind of known aircraft that have ever been developed, military, civilian, or otherwise. I have no idea what that could have been.
And also sticking around long enough for him to catch a flight out here and cover the thing. Because he was a West Coaster, was he not?
No, he was based in New York at the time.
Oh, well, that's awesome.
Yeah, so he just popped right down to North Carolina and was there. But again, it was several subsequent nights that these sightings persisted. And again, I would encourage listeners to go online and just look up the Lumberton UFOs from 1975 in North Carolina. And, Lee probably actually did some reporting on that. If you go online, you may even find some articles. He may have touched on that in his column there at the Huffington Post because he saw that UFO.
No doubt. Well, rest in peace, Lee. It was wonderful meeting you back in Arizona in 2013. And hey, man, thank you for your contributions to the field because that was just incredible. And also just all around super, super nice guy.
Great guy, yeah. I have a lot of fond memories of Lee Spiegel. And, he worked a lot with James Fox on his film, The Phenomenon.
Yeah.
James called the other day, and, we always have to chuckle about, fond memories about Lee. But Lee has been an integral part in working with so many people and so many projects with regard to the UFO subject.
Yeah, I think I still have a photo of us all in the war room. It was you, me, James Fox. I think Lee was in the picture.
Oh, yeah.
Jason McClellan, Maureen Ellsbury, Nick Pope is there. And
Travis Walton, I think.
Travis Walton sitting right up in front of the camera. And a good buddy of mine, I haven't talked to him in years, but I really need to get in touch with him. Dale Hendrickson, the artist for The Simpsons. Man, me and him had some fun. But I digress. That's just a fond memory of the UFO Congress. That was a pretty cosmic year because also Stanton Friedman was there that year.
Stanton Friedman was there.
Right before he passed away. Yeah, Richard Dolan was there.
Richard Dolan was there. Dr. Roger Lear, who was he went to Brazil and documented, so many of the strange happenings down there. Not the ones around Colares, but the Varginha case.
Yeah.
And again, when I was on the phone with James Fox recently, he was just telling me, and I won't say anything, no spoiler alerts, but I mean, he's definitely still following that case and still finding new information. So,
I'm sure.
Of course, having been to Brazil many times myself, meu português está muito, muito ruim, but I still am studying, learning, because eventually I'm going to go back down there and continue to document the Brazilian UFO enigma. There's a lot of that going on down in South America.
I don't know what you just said, but it touched my heart. But
muito obrigado.
When you have this idea of these aircraft flying around in the air in 1975, now I'm not saying that it's impossible that this was some sort of government craft. In fact, most of the time, that's kind of where my mind goes to. But, one of the things, and Austin, if you got some other information you want to throw in here, one of the things that we were going to kind of talk about was, okay, so here's this thing that happens in Lumberton, North Carolina. Not exactly right here in Asheville, but hey, North Carolina ain't the biggest state, close enough. So one thing that's kind of strange about where the bro and I grew up is we are right next to, I think our property actually in some ways kind of borders the Pisgah National Forest where we grew up.
Very close, yeah.
And when you drive up the parkway, which is under reconstruction now thanks to Hurricane Helene, we always used to see little metal signs that were attached to trees here and there that would say certain areas of the Pisgah National Forest next to where we grew up were designated government testing areas, which we always thought was a little bit strange.
That is interesting. And, as a forest ranger's son, I probably have little perspective on that. The Bent Creek Experimental Forest is probably something that you're speaking to. And that's dealing with more biological experimentation there, rare plant species, a lot of, testing out things on that type of it, experimentation as opposed to your, top secret aircraft experimentation.
I don't buy it.
No, I was going to clarify again. Yeah, the Bent Creek Experimental Forest. There's a lot of forestry and development that's occurring there. And again, as U.S. federal land, I mean, technically that is a U.S. federal government operation that's being undertaken. But I mean, my interpretation would be that for the most part, it's certainly not military or an intelligence community operation.
I don't buy it in the least. I don't buy it for 5 seconds.
It's still a weird sign to see that it's probably led to a lot more theories.
Well, would you guys like to hear why I thought that was a little strange in hindsight?
No, I would love to.
Now that we've thoroughly debunked it, go ahead.
Now that you assholes have shit all over my conspiracy theory, I'm going to throw a little shit your way.
Let's do it.
Look, every January I used to go on this camping trip with a bunch of my high school buddies where we would go out and camp in the sub-below temperatures because we were idiots and we thought it was a good idea. And I don't make it out there all that much anymore because I've found that the older that I get, it's harder to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But let me tell you a little strange story. It snowed like hell one year out there in January. And so we left our tent up there and we were just like, we're going to roll back up to the campground, which was actually in Mills River, North Carolina. And we're just going to go grab the tent, when the snow kind of thaws out a little bit and we can actually get up there and grab the thing. So my friend John Bradley and I, we drove all the way out to Mills River on this tent retrieval trip. And we get up there and the tent is gone. Turns out some buddies of ours had, packed it up for us. So we're coming back down essentially Brevard Road next to the French Broad River and very close to the Parkway and what is known as the North Carolina Arboretum there.
Yeah.
And look, man, you could take this story for whatever you think. I'm going to be sucralose for a second. I'm not saying it's aliens. But John Bradley, who is driving the car, and I am in the passenger side, the river is on our right. And John goes, "What the hell is that?" And I see him start looking up over the French Broad River on the right. And so I look up out the window. I would say it is probably maybe 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the winter time. It's January, so it gets dark pretty early. It is not dark by any means at this time. It's a little overcast. I see, and this is what my brain interpreted. I see a triangular craft about the size of 2 cars, about the length of 2 cars, hovering over the French Broad River. And John, I'm like, are you seeing this thing? He's like, yes. He's like, that does not look like a plane. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think it looks like a plane either. We are right by where you turn up to the left to go into the Arboretum, and John pulls up onto the parkway because we're going to go up there to the parkway overlook. Unfortunately, it's the middle of the winter, so that's closed off. So we park the car as far up as we possibly can, and we go running up to the parkway overlook to see if we can find this thing, and it is completely gone. Now, that's why I thought it was weird that there were government testing signs around the woods out there. You and your experimental ferns. But what I will say also, Caleb, but I will say, Hanks, that was not the only instance that I saw something that I thought was a bit strange. One night, me and this guy, Mark Hickson, who is the little brother, one of the many little brothers of my best friend, Matt Hickson, we're driving into downtown Asheville from the same area, from the Brevard Road exit where the Biltmore Mall used to be and now the Asheville outlets are. And as we are coming across the bridge that goes over Interstate 40, there's this triangular thing hovering over the frickin' interstate there. And both me and Mark see this thing, and we have a similar reaction to how John and I did. And I'm like, are you looking at what I'm looking at? He's like, dude, what the hell is that thing?
Would you describe it as the same thing you witnessed the first time around?
The thing that I saw when we were coming back from grabbing the tent, it seemed to be a bit longer in shape, almost like a dark gray paper airplane in shape.
Okay.
This thing
Was an F-117 Nighthawk. I'm just kidding.
potentially. This thing that I saw with Mark, it was further out. So there's a total potential for that to be the same thing. I think that they were similar enough in shape. Now, look, I am completely willing to concede that maybe I was just, I'm sorry, but like, it just did not look like a damn plane, whatever it was. Now, again, I am also not saying that this was aliens. I think that both things that I witnessed, I will describe both of them as looking triangular. Now, the second one that I described, that one was at night, and I could see the lights on the bottom of it. I do not remember seeing lights on the bottom of the one that I saw hovering over the French Broad River. I am not saying that I think that I saw an extraterrestrial craft. What I do think that I saw was some sort of experimental government or just experimental aircraft that was made by humans.
Hey, I'm not going to knock that at all, and I understand. Didn't mean to shit on your experimental forest.
Whatever,
idea
Austin,
there.
the damage is done.
I will say with that regards,
Screw you guys. No, I'm just kidding.
Lockheed Martin, who is a known government contractor, aerospace craft designer. I don't know how the technical terminology for that would go, but they do have a facility in Greenville, South Carolina, right over the mountain range. So I don't know if it's a complete stretch to think that some of these experimental aircraft that they might be, working on could be tested in this area.
Yeah, they got an experimental greenhouse too. Well, look, again, I just thought that was weird, but you know what's even weirder than that? I'm not the only dude that has had a weird triangular shaped thingamabob sighting right there near where I saw my shit. In fact, we're sitting in the room with him right now.
His name is Gomez.
It's not me.
Code name Gomez, at least. No. I never saw it, Caleb, but
Kiss my ass.
I was. For that, guess what? I'm going to take your Guinness.
Oh,
God.
babe.
I'll share it with you.
You guys are going to shit on my experimental forest and then you're going to steal my Guinness? Why do I even do this show?
I know. The sighting in question had been I'm trying to think if it was when I worked in radio, but
I thought it was before that.
I think it was before that. So I had been with a couple of gentlemen that night. So the brother of Mark Hickson, Matt Hickson, and then also Justin Biltner, our friend with Three Doors Down. There was some very unfortunate news, of course, that just came out recently about.
I would honestly like to share that with the audience. So our very good friend, Justin Biltner, who we may actually end up having on the podcast because he's just a very interesting guy. He's had a pretty storied life, and he has had a vested interest in the paranormal as long as we have known this guy. But Justin Biltner, very good friend of ours, and he plays bass in the band Three Doors Down. Unfortunately, just recently, Brad Arnold, their lead singer, came out on a statement on his Instagram that he has been diagnosed with a stage 4 carcinoma in his lung, which is absolutely horrific news. He seems to be having a really, really good attitude about it. He's just asking for thoughts and prayers. And, I did text Justin about it, and they are all just trying to be as optimistic as they possibly can. But I think, any rational human being would be completely spooked by that situation. So please keep our friend Brad Arnold in your thoughts. Me, Micah, and Austin went out and saw Three Doors Down 2 Octobers ago.
October and a half ago.
As guests of the band. They were very kind. They had us come out there to Cherokee, and we saw them there at the Cherokee Harrah's. No, it's not the Harrah's. What is the Harrah's Casino?
The Harrah's Casino Event Center.
Yeah,
up on the VIP balcony.
Not to be confused, with the Harrah's Event Center in downtown Asheville, which is now the
the Harrah's Cherokee Center.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the Harrah's Cherokee Event Center, though.
Right. Yeah. So they're different. So I just want to make that distinction. We were actually out there at the Cherokee Casino, and they had us as their guests, and the band played great. But again, our heart remains with Brad and the entire band. Now, again, that said, this was back in the days before Justin was in Three Doors Down. He and Matt and I, we were driving along the Parkway, and frankly, we'd just been up there because that's what we would do back in the day. We would go drive up the Parkway. We wouldn't do anything illicit. Most of us, we might drink beer, but we were
Which is a felony.
No, we wouldn't do it up on the Parkway.
I'm
saying, no. We would do that in the right conditions, but none of us did anything. I don't think the guys even smoked, and I've never been a smoker myself. So my point is, we were all just driving. We might have had like some gas station coffees or cappuccinos or something like that.
All right, you're going to jail.
Yeah, we would often do that though. We would grab a coffee down there at that hot spot on 191, and we would just drive up and stay up later than hell drinking coffee and telling ghost stories driving up in the mountains. That was like a common thing. You and I did this a little bit back in the day too. And
we went to Rosman one night, and that was spooky as hell.
Went to Rosman, and I'm pretty sure we saw a bobcat.
We did. Those woods down there creep me the hell out to this day.
Go up in Balsam Grove?
No, I don't. Not that night. We were up around Sunburst.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was just a common thing, though. I would take all the guys. There was this thing we would go up and we would drive up the old roads back through Bent Creek that would take you up under the Parkway, and then you could actually hook around and get onto the Parkway, and you were almost at Mount Pisgah at that point.
Yeah.
But there's this creepy, it's the bridge, and you drive under the bridge, but, as you're driving under that bridge, people have put, all kinds of graffiti there over the years.
I ran under that bridge the night that I was talking about on our River Siren episode where I told you that my trek home through the darkness. I ran under that in the darkness by myself in the middle of the night as I had made my journey on foot from Mills River to Brevard Road, which was, okay, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, well, it was creepy, and it was a common thing for me to drive up there, and we would tell ghost stories. So on this night, Matt and Justin and I were driving. I was driving, I think, a Chevy Tracker at the time. And as we were coming back down the Parkway, the guys didn't say anything. They were looking off to the right, and I was driving, of course. So I remember we were approaching a tunnel somewhere up there, and I'm trying to remember what the overlook would have been. I could probably guesstimate it, and I know that it was definitely a good ways down from Mount Pisgah and the Mount Pisgah, Inn and all that. I would say maybe roughly halfway between the Pisgah Inn and where the Parkway exit for 191 is.
Okay, so you'd already hit that series of tunnels and everything. Yeah.
We were in between, and there were still some tunnels yet to come. And so as we were coming down and approaching one of those tunnels, the guys were just looking out the window, and nobody was really talking. I'm driving, and they were being perfectly quiet. As we're coming up on this tunnel, one of the two guys says, "What was that? What was that?" And then they both start freaking out and saying there was some sort of an object, and it looked like it was almost like a tent or a pyramid. It was hovering in the air up above that mountaintop down there. And they were both very specific about that. In fact, Justin, who's an excellent artist, he actually drew images of what it looked like to him. And again, if you imagine like a little pop-up tent, a domed tent with a kind of a pyramidal sort of shape, it was essentially that kind of shape, and it had a orange-red coloration. Now, I never saw the object, but what I did see was, because the guys were so excited, they said, turn the car around right now. So, we didn't waste any time. Before we got to the tunnel, there was no other cars on the road. This was the middle of the night. So I just go down there, and I'm turning around in the road, and I do a point turn and go back up the way. And as I'm turning, I'm seeing the red light beaming up through the trees from the direction of whatever they had seen.
Yeah.
It is, not orange, yellow. It's not white. It was red light and extremely bright. So whatever the illumination source was, it was absolutely projecting that light up through the trees. Frustratingly, I could not see the object, but I could tell that whatever was producing the light was producing, such luminosity. There was so much power behind this. And I'm like, that's not a car sitting down there. These are obviously not headlights. The light coloration is completely wrong. There's too much light. So I'm like, man, I'm about to see a UFO. I remember thinking as I'm driving back up the road, I'm about to see something extraordinary, because something is producing this much light through the trees, and I can see that, whatever it is. We drive, and I'm speeding to try and get back up the road. And by the time we get up there to where the view of the mountain is, and I remember where the mountain was, and I'll get to that point in a moment. But once we get back up to where it's clear, there's no object, no light, no anything. Whatever it was had completely vanished, and we were all just dumbfounded, because they had seen the object, but the light was plainly evident, and we were all completely expecting by the time we got up there, whatever was producing that light would still be just sitting there hovering over the mountain. So the following day, we were intrigued enough by this that, again, if you go up the back way through Bent Creek around the backside of Lake Powhatan, that old dirt road takes you up under that bridge that I was talking about, and then you can get on the parkway. We were roughly in that vicinity, and so we decided to go back up the parkway, take the exit, and go down the Mills River side of that road and continue on down the mountain, because we figured whatever the object was hovering right over that mountain near that road. So Matt, Justin, and I, we return. We go down the road. We find a pull-off, and we start hiking a little ways up in the woods, and the first thing we encounter is a black bear. And I remember I threw my hand up, and I was like, guys, stop. And the black bear just ran when it saw us. But once we saw the bear, we were kind of like, okay, I guess we're done here. Funny, these days I'll chase a black bear very carefully, but...
So you are with friends. They see a red triangular craft, and you're trying to tell me it's all about a bunch of ferns? You bastard.
Were you already introduced to the concept of triangular UFOs by this time?
Oh, hell yeah. He knew about them when he was a baby.
Yeah, I was well aware of triangular UFOs, and one of the reasons why was because back around 2008, there were sightings of large UFOs. Not all the descriptions described large triangles, but some of them did. 2008, January, Stephenville, Texas, there were multiple witness sightings, including many law enforcement officers who saw large UFOs moving at very high speeds over Stephenville, Texas. Now, intriguingly, the FAA, through a Freedom of Information Act request, released some documentation to a colleague of mine who at the time was the director of research for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. He has since left, and he is actually one of the two founding members of an organization I'm a part of called the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. He's not a doctor, I guess he's an MD, but Robert Powell, who's a career chemist who worked in an R&D laboratory, and now he's one of the co-founders of the SCU. So Robert got these FOIA documents that clearly showed that there was a large object that had been moving in that vicinity at that time, that there had been aircraft from the Air Force base there nearby. I don't recall what the name of that was, but these aircraft had come out there to try and intercept this thing, and everything seemed to correlate with eyewitness sightings, and they were literally able to spot the locations where the military aircraft had gone out and where the presumed anomalous aircraft had been operating, and correlate those with witness sightings on the ground where people had said at about this time, 6:50, I saw the thing come speeding over and there were blue lights on it. Sure enough, the radar data seemed to correlate with those sightings, and so they were able to make a pretty good case that there was a large object, which, curiously, it really went dangerously close to the Crawford Ranch, which, again, at that time, this was, I think, immediately prior to the inauguration, but at that time, George W. Bush was still the president. And his famous, home away from Washington was the Crawford Ranch. And this object, whatever it was, flew very close to his home. And so the question, of course, that had been raised at that time was, what kind of aircraft is able to just with impunity fly into the airspace over the president's home away from Washington? Real serious question. That was all happening in 2008, and right around that same time that we were all hanging out, and I was getting more and more intrigued by the stories that were coming out of Texas. And this is probably one of the reasons why the guys and I were driving around late at night, and lo and behold, we end up seeing something that they described as being roughly trianguloid over the Blue Ridge Parkway. Now, there was a reporter named Steve Hammonds who I was in communication with, and he was, reporting on this. The best known reporter who I did correspond with, but by the time she and I were in touch, she no longer would talk about it. She completely withdrew from UFOs. But her name was Angelia Joyner. And she ended up actually walking away from her newspaper job because they told her stop reporting about these UFOs. And she thought the story was big enough that she said, I'll walk before I'll stop talking about this. There were so many reports of these things. And so around that time, our friend, and we mentioned him a lot on the show, Joshua P. Warren.
We can't get away from the Warren verse.
Warren was the host at that time of a program on 570 AM.
I love you, Josh. We're going to get you on the podcast. I don't think you're listening right now, but if you go back, I love you, buddy.
Yeah. Josh, we had a lot of adventures. And one of the ongoing adventures he and I had together was he was the host of a show on Saturday nights on 570 AM called Speaking of Strange. And
those were the good old days.
They were.
Unless you worked in radio, and specifically for me, I know that this is very specific, but the old studio up there off of Patton Avenue, the old 570 studio, man, it was just all old analog equipment. It looked like Star Wars in there, man, because it's just all these old opaque buttons, boards with buttons where still to this day, they don't know what all of them do. Yeah. And Micah and I, they were so dumb. They gave me and Micah the keys to the castle a couple of nights. And they were just like, so you two guys who are like barely in your 20s, you got the whole radio station. Don't mess this up. And we're like, well, no problem.
The reason why was because if there was ever going to be inclement weather, I would volunteer to just stay the night up there.
Yeah.
And I would report on weather. When they had this new prospect for a show about, the paranormal that Josh was going to host, they said, well, the only time slot we can give you is like, 7 or 8 p.m. on Saturday nights. And where are we going to find a producer that wants to do this? I remember Josh calling me and saying, I think that they're going to give me that time slot on Saturday night. So I ran down to my program director's office, Brian Hall. I said, Brian, do you have a producer for that show? He says, no, you want it? He was just hoping somebody would volunteer.
Oh, that's so great.
And so I was like, Josh, I'm your producer.
It's weird that they didn't throw that at you because you were working at the radio station. You knew Josh. They knew you were into weird shit. It's weird that they didn't approach you about it.
You'd think, yeah. But so in any case, I was primarily a producer, which meant that I would, run the entire board. And also sometimes book the guests. I would take the phone calls, and I would also co-host. Josh, when he would leave though, he would travel. Josh was going to a lot of events back in those days, and he put the idea out to me. He said, "Would you want to fill in as a host for me?" And I said, "You got it." I said, "Let's do it." I haven't got a good radio voice or anything, but I'll do what I can.
That's why when you heard Micah back in the day, he's like, "You're listening to Speaking of Strange with Micah Hanks."
I would disguise my voice so people wouldn't know it was me. Yeah.
but then I don't know, man. He started, lifting weights, and now he's got the husky, beautiful voice you hear now.
Well, the funny thing is, though, again, what the producers really loved about that was they were like, okay, he's a producer, and he can go in there and he can run the board and host the show.
This guy's cheap.
They were like, we don't have to hire anybody, so we could just pay him to go in there and fill in, and we're only covering one person in their salary. So they said, yeah, go in there and you produce that show and you host that thing while he's traveling. So anytime Josh would travel, and my inspiration had always been Art Bell, right?
Hey, let me boost your ego a little bit. I went out, just, hanging out with some friends one time, and I ran into a girl that used to go to some of the punk rock shows that, me and Austin used to play back in the day. And she was like, dude, I listen to your brother's podcast so often. And she's like, your brother's voice. Holy crap. It is the best thing I've ever heard. And I was like, yeah, the bro does sound way better on the mic than I will ever. Like I don't have a radio voice. I don't even have a podcast voice. I don't know why I'm doing this thing, but especially when, the bro is in the game. But I just want to let you know, hey, there's people out there that love hearing your voice.
Well, thank you. Years of Guinness and coffee. I guess I'll do that for you. Back in those days, though, I still had my original voice, my Gomez persona. So I would come in, and again, with the Stephenville story being really hot like it was, Josh was like, do you want to go in there and maybe do a UFO show? I'm like, yeah, you got it. So I would go in there. I produced, of course, because I was a producer, I produced an entire special intro for the second hour that was nothing but UFO sound bites and special music, and I'd get a bunch of buddies. Caleb would come in there, and, we'd get Dakota Waddell and Matt Oakley and, our enigmatic friend Mobius. And, of course, my longtime collaborator and dear friend Christopher McCollum, a.k.a. McNonymous.
Morn.
Yeah. Karina Lynn Everett, of course, was another one of our friends who would come in there with us. One night I had, Kurt Arledge and Lauren Habenicht in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, she's Lauren Arledge now.
She is now, but, yeah, back in the day she was still a Habenicht. But
I was on that show.
Yeah, so, I would put together these panels, and we would just go in there and host the show. Now, on one night around the time of the Stephenville stuff, it was just me and I think it was Forrest Connor producing, because that night I did actually bring in a producer. Sometimes we would do that. And the reason why is because although I could run the whole show by myself, and did many times just sitting there in the studio by myself, talking, taking calls, and producing the show, firing audio, just like Art Bell did it. That was my inspiration.
That's the dream, dude. You got to live the dream.
And I, again, every week on my show, I still do the same thing with my podcast. But again, Art Bell was, the inspiration, the guy who, him sitting alone in the studio, fires the music, starts talking. He goes to a break, brings his guest on, has him on hold, comes back from the break, starts talking, and now joining us, and he hosted and produced his own show. And I'm like, I could do that.
Your new studio is awesome. I love it very much. But there is something really amazing about being in the old studio. You got these big, tall, gigantic radio towers with the big blinking lights, this misty field that looked creepy as hell at night out there. I mean, dude, it was a complete vibe out there.
So the thing about the radio ranch, as we called it, was there's this massive field, the transmitter tower field, and you got 4 huge transmitter towers out there. This is terrestrial radio. And the engineers used to tell the stories about when one of the lights goes out on the top of that thing, they had to climb up, all the way up, wearing a harness. They had to climb to the top of that thing and replace the light bulb. I mean,
how many people does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Well, 1 when you work in radio, and nobody wants that job. But anyway, it's out in that massive field and everything. And the old ranch was just this, single level property out there. They built a multi-million-dollar facility there that was actually, at the time it was built, state-of-the-art for what is now iHeartMedia, but it was previously Clear Channel. The old building, man, was the one with the vibe. I mean, you had the old racks. My old studio, it was a closet with sound reinforcement and a Neumann U87 microphone. I mean, and it was just really, really cool. So anyway, long story short, we'd be up there late at night. And around the time of the Stephenville situation, I would just open the phone lines and say, we're going to talk about UFOs. If you've seen a UFO over the Carolinas, call in, let me know what you have seen. And so one night, we started getting calls. And this fellow named Brian calls in, and he said, I've got something I want to get off my chest. That thing, that massive, that monolith in the sky that moves at snail speed. And I said, oh, do tell. And I had a suspicion I knew what he was talking about, but as Brian went on to describe it, and in fact, I've got the audio of this, which at some point maybe I'll supply for you guys if you want to play it for your subscribers or something like that.
They might like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I archived all the audio from these calls from back in the day. So Brian tells this story where he and his cousin, who was back from the military, they were having dinner over at his home, which was in a rural part of Fairview, North Carolina. And as they step out onto the porch, he says, they step out at the most opportune moment. The sun's just going down and everything, so there's still a little light in the sky. And they look up, and there's like a, one of those great big triangular star destroyers, right?
God.
Just going, as he said, at snail speed, just drifting overhead, no sound. Well, his cousin looks at this, and they're like, what in the hell? So he runs back inside, goes, and he gets his gun. Now, he's not going to shoot at it. He was grabbing the rifle for the scope so he could look through the scope and try and get a look at the bottom. And he said that the bottom kind of almost gave the impression of texture, like there was rivets or something on it. And it's going along, and he said that they watched it as it crossed over South Cliff Mountain and went on in the direction eventually toward, I-40, and then would have proceeded on northward until Tennessee. And he called the Asheville Regional Airport, and he said they just laughed at me. But, we were just awestruck by this thing. It was flying at relatively low altitude. It was massive. It was just a big black triangle just flying along.
And you said this was at night?
It was just after sundown.
Man, there you go.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, God, what was this, this object? What could be that large and flying at low altitude, right over, in plain view in the United States? So I went on my show years later on what's now known as the Micah Hanks program, and I started telling stories like this, which, again, going back to my days in radio, began really my interest in the UFOs, or what are now called UAP phenomena. I would open the phone lines, people would call in. There were other stories that, again, we can share another time, but just incredible stories. And I go back to Brian's story, and I played that audio so many years later on my podcast, and lo and behold, I start getting emails from people up in Johnson City, Tennessee, and they said, what year was that? And I'm like, I think it was 1987 or 88 that he said he saw this. And they're like, I was a kid. My family and I were coming out of Grandma's house that night, and coming from the south, headed north, we see that thing go flying overhead. He said, we may have seen the same one. Literally the same one, because it would have been coming from Asheville, the direction it was flying. And we stood there and watched it. My dad called. I remember my dad screaming, get out here. And I thought he was waiting on me to come out because we were trying to leave. And sure enough, this witness had said he comes running out of Grandma's house, and just in time to see this thing, just massive triangle floating overhead. Now, a lot of people have seen these things. Art Bell and his late wife, Ramona, Art Bell passed away too, but his first wife who passed away, Ramona, they saw one of these massive triangles. There was a famous case involving a sighting by multiple police officers in January, I believe, of 2000 in St. Clair County, Illinois. And my good friend David Marler, who wrote a great book about this called Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation. That title, of course, a callback to the early Sign report, right? The estimate of the situation under Project Sign in the 1940s. Well, Marler investigated that UAP that was observed by multiple police officers in St. Clair County, Illinois. And again, it's just one of many similar cases. But yet again, the earliest known mass witness sighting of a triangular UAP occurred in Lumberton, North Carolina. And again, these sightings continued of large triangular UAP right up at least through the 1980s, maybe even more recently. And I have, within the last year, spoken to residents of North Carolina who in various places, they weren't living in North Carolina at the time, but they have described seeing similar things on up into the 2000s. So the question is, what are these objects? Is this something of ours? Are they something not of this earth? We don't know. Like you said, Caleb, my mind kind of tends to gravitate toward maybe these are some kind of experimental aircraft. The idea of a stealth blimp of some kind has been floated, no pun intended, over many years. The idea of some sort of a large inflatable radar reflector, that idea has been put forward. I don't know, but I can tell you right now, North Carolina has a long and intimate history of involvement with triangular UAP.
Well, I will just tie this up with one kind of strange coincidence that's going to tie back to something that's probably going to be a bit close to home for our listeners. The last episode that we did about Bigfoot was a story that was told by the drummer of our dad's old garage band. And I was told by the late guitar player of that band, Jeff, rest in peace, my friend, that he saw exactly what you're talking about. A big triangular shaped craft moving at a snail's pace. And you want to know where he saw that thing?
Bent Creek?
Brown Mountain.
He saw it over Brown Mountain. Yeah, he said he was there with a family from Charlotte and that a large black triangular UFO passed over the Linville Gorge. Well, really quickly, I know we're wrapping up, but since we're talking about members of the Satyrs who saw a triangular UAP one night coming back from a gig, I believe, out near Maggie Valley, North Carolina, my father, your father, in the car with Bill Byerly, our good friend of Whitewater Bluegrass.
Everybody knows Bill Byerly.
Yeah, everybody in the world knows Bill Byerly, I promise you that. But Bill and my dad saw, again, what they said was like a UFO. And I said, Dad, what did it look like? He said, well, there were 3 points of light. And I said, Very familiar story.
Say no more.
Yeah, and I also spoke with Bill about that over the years. And, Dad said he was convinced that after thinking about it, he thought it might have been the stealth bomber. Bill, when I spoke with Bill was really, really intrigued and said, man, I think they're up there. I'll just say this, though. It's not impossible that it was a stealth bomber flying at low altitude over the Maggie Valley, Waynesville area of North Carolina. But I'm going to tell you, when those aircraft fly, they usually don't feature points of light at each of the three corners. So, I don't know what that was that they saw, but they certainly said they saw something large, low-flying, triangular shaped, and they don't recall there being any noise associated as it flew directly over them and they both saw it.
Talk about being consistent with everything else we've just covered too. So,
Well, not to get back into my weird experimental fern theory, but I will say, Caleb, Hanks, I have also heard that they do a lot of flight training out around the mountains of western North Carolina here, because a lot of the places that pilots over the years have had to train for that are areas overseas in the Middle East that are very similar. The terrain is very, very similar here. And so when they're kind of flying through the mountains, I'm assuming that there's maybe, some wind patterns and things that are very similar. And so this has been an area that those aircraft have used as a training ground for different, military exercises. So this also does kind of invite the idea that there is potential that they are testing out some experimental drones that they are using in warfare and battle scenarios. That to me seems frankly like the most plausible scenario, but I will say it is very, very hard to keep that thought process on track when you hear about these, Star Destroyer, Star Wars style, triangular, giant, floating, slow-moving things. I mean, God, if I were to see that, I'd be pretty hard-pressed to be convinced that that was us. But all that being said, everybody, we hope that this has been an eye-opening look into just the UFO experiences that are here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Like, just North Carolina.
And I think this is kind of the tip of the iceberg, too. We could have done a deep dive on various subjects that we kind of touched on, and maybe we will in the future. But I think this was a good general overview episode of the UFO phenomenon in Western North Carolina specifically.
I agree. And the bro, Mr. Micah Hanks, dude, you have put so many years of research into this. You have put blood, sweat, and tears into this research and trying to figure out what all of this is. And Austin and I could not be more appreciative towards you for, number one, how much you've helped out with our podcast, helping us get this thing off the ground, and also just your contributions to the UFO subject, to paranormal subject, cryptozoology, every single thing that you've ever done in this field. Thank you so very much. And also, we could not thank you enough for coming on and sharing this information with us, sharing your experiences with us. You and I have had a lot of experiences with this stuff, and I think that the strangeness is probably only going to get stranger because that seems to be the trend of it. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on again. I honestly cannot wait until the next time that you're able to come on here, because every time the three of us get in a room, dude, it's just a wild time.
There's a lot we can discuss, including how I concluded that all these triangular UAP were actually the Northrop Grumman RQ-180, but that's a whole other story. So,
well, look, all I am going to say to our listeners is, number one, be kind to your fellow man. Number two, TR3, be safe. And you need to stay spooky. Now, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, we this week have gotten some beautiful, 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 wonderful emails from listeners who have been writing in and telling us how much they appreciate what we're doing here at Ghost of the Mountains. And I have to tell you from the bottom of my heart, I really cannot express to you in words how much that means to me. Austin, I know it means a ton to you when people are telling us how much they're enjoying this.
Yeah, especially for something that really kind of started as a passion project for it. It's awesome that so many people have caught on as quickly as they have, and we've kind of become a part of their weekly listening routine, and that really means a lot.
Oh, it means the world to me, and I cannot thank them enough for writing into the show and expressing how much they're enjoying this. And we love doing this show for you. We just want to let you know you can subscribe on ghostsinthemountains.com. We have an ad-free version of the podcast via Patreon. You can subscribe to us there, and we are throwing in some little tidbits. In fact, maybe the bro is going to provide for us an actual audio recording of one of the things that he mentioned on Speaking of Strange back in the day. But once again, thank you for your support on the show. And we will
think
catch.
that's our cue.
Yeah, this big thunderclap just happened. That's our cue to get out of here. Thank you so much for listening to Ghosts in the Mountains, and we will catch you on another episode next week. Stay spooky, and good night, Micah. Thanks again, buddy.
Good night, friends.
Good night, Austin.
Night, buddies.
Good night, Ned.
And he even claimed to have this little, what some have called an alien mummy.